Yes, ma'am. Don't be nervous about disagreeing. This is totally fine. Yeah.
So what about in the context of like, if your neighbors are, well, half of them, they don't open the door, they don't
Mm-hmm.
really do anything, and there's just like ghosts hanging from trees and
Yeah,
dead things everywhere.
I tried to give that caveat.
Cemetery.
Right.
Like exposing your children to all of that, and that's like so much of what you see, but yet there is that context of like the redemption part of Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're just lost. We don't know what to do.
So if I was in a neighborhood where only half of them celebrated it and the other half that did were really yucky about it, I wouldn't be excited about going door to door.
Yeah.
So I might just say, let's do something else. Or what my parents do, they get out the grill and prepare a feast for everyone who comes by and give them dinner and just be very hospitable at their home.
Right.
That's an option.
Yeah.
What about the part of it that, like, scripture talking about, like, not celebrating what the pagans celebrate?
The question is, what are you celebrating? So the holiday is not, there's not like an official rule or list of this is what it entails. If all you're doing is celebrating fall and giving out candy and being hospitable, I don't think you're complicit with other people who are actually Satanists. That's my conviction. But if you think I can't be part of that with a clear conscience, don't. And no one in here should judge you for that.
Right.
Yeah.
The only part that I'd like to toss in here is when our kids are all grown, don't avoid talking to them about it.
The kids?
And reason.
Oh, yeah. That's part of discipleship.
Explaining what you're doing, why you don't like that, but some of the things that you've brought up that are actually considerations on the other side, and have them join in the ethical debate of what's going on, so that they know what it is that you're driving at and why what you're asking them to do actually has a gospel Christian purpose behind it, so that you're bringing them along with you rather than just saying,
Yep.
here's the convictions and we're doing this.
That's right.
That they know.
That's kind of like what this sister was saying about their pastors who just change the music thing without explaining it. Whatever you're doing, you should explain it. As a pastor, as a parent, that's part of discipleship.
And just to piggyback off of my brother, go dig into it as a family. He's talking about having the ethical debate. Dig into this. Where did it come from? When did it originate? Why does it have the name Halloween? And just all of that.
But even then, when you study it, when you study something, you can say, oh, here are the origins. But then almost no one else actually knows that.
For sure.
Like, the tune of this hymn we sang, it's from a bar room from the 1700s. We can't sing this. And like, no one knows that.
Right. I'm just throwing with the Halloween thing, like, for our conviction, again, not judging anybody, is we've said we're not going to do the make our house ugly and scary, and our costumes aren't going to be ugly and scary. It's going to be Iron Man and Star Wars and whatever else for our family as a way to, like you said, engage the community with hospitality and relationships in a way that doesn't join in with any kind of celebration
Right.
of death and sorrow.
Good. On page 80 and 81 of my book, I list 27 more examples of issues about which you might need to calibrate your conscience. And I hold the right view on all 27 of these. So I'm happy to talk more about them. But I thought it might be interesting to talk about number 14 on that list. It says public school versus private Christian school versus homeschool. I made some comments about that last night, and I thought I sensed some of you were interested in that, and this might be an area to talk a little bit more about. So let me tell you my conviction and how I've thought about this. Our school just had a conference a month or so ago, and I gave a session at the conference on managing your household well. So basically how a pastor should shepherd his family, his wife and kids. And I used the metaphor of a shepherd with sheep, that a shepherd knows the sheep, he feeds the sheep, he leads the sheep, and he protects the sheep. And under protect, I had a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, and one of those things was protect your children from wolves, from harm outside. And I gave this caveat at the beginning of the talk, is I'm going to share a bunch of specific applications of my convictions, and this is to be helpful to you as you try to formulate your own. I am not saying that you have to agree with all my convictions. So I'm just saying, here's how my wife and I have thought about this. So here's what I said under protect your children. I gave 5 practical ways we work this out with our daughters, and here's one of them. I said, we do not send our children to government schools, especially now that public schools in America are indoctrinating children in woke ideologies such as LGBT plus and critical race theory. And I footnote an ongoing investigative series in City Journal by Christopher Rufo on this. It's Rufo on woke education. Again, this isn't every school, every public school, but it's a lot of them that are doing alarming things. And I live in Minneapolis, and let's just say it's not like the red country of Montana, all right? The public schools would be in line a lot with what Rufo's talking about. So I said, we parents are responsible before God to give our children a Christian education. And my wife and I don't think we can responsibly do that with our government schools, which at best attempt to teach cold, hard facts apart from God's existence, at best, let alone acknowledging God's supremacy. We have chosen to homeschool our children in combination with co-ops and online options. It helps that my wife has a degree in early childhood education and that she's outstanding at teaching children, and we're grateful for an excellent option for junior high and high school students, Logos Online School. It's live classical education. So my oldest daughter, Kara, she's taken Latin, literature, logic, algebra, and she's recruited a bunch of friends from our church to take them with her online. They have a whole cohort. It's great. So that's my personal conviction. I wanted to share that with you. But there's a lot more to the story than that. I grew up, I told you my parents divorced when I was young, and my biological father did not permit me to attend a Christian school. So I grew up public school the whole way through. I think I took 7th grade off homeschooled, but the rest of the way was public school. I started a Bible study at 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade schools, at different schools. I was at a different school every year from grade 6 through 12. We moved around a lot. So I went to a public school, I was evangelistic, I was upfront about my faith, and I don't think it harmed me, and I think it turned out okay, I think. But now that I have the choice, and schools have changed so much since I was in school now, I have chosen with my wife not to take that option for our girls. That's what we think is best for our girls. I'm a pastor with, I think, 15 or 16 guys, and one of them has 3 sons, public school, they're high school age. One just graduated, he's in college now. So I don't feel like we have to say you can't be an elder. He's a fellow elder. We respect each other. We've reached different convictions on this, and we get along. I teach on faculty at Bethlehem College and Seminary. There's a guy on faculty who I recruited to join us to teach New Testament, and he has 3 kids who are in the public school system right now. And we disagree on what we would do for our kids, but we have close fellowship, we love each other, we get along. So I'm just presenting that to you because when I share my conviction, it could sound like, and if you differ from my conviction, you need to repent. That might be the case, but not necessarily. It's possible to hold a conviction while recognizing someone who doesn't hold it exactly the way you do can be honoring the Lord. Now, again, I'm getting ahead of myself because that's the next step we're going to take is how do we interact with other people when our consciences differ. Right now we're focusing on just calibrating your own conscience. I want to focus there right now. So how did I reach that conviction to calibrate my conscience that way? Well, I'm thinking there's a principle. Parents must give their children a Christian enculturation. We should all agree on that. And then I'm looking at the options, and I'm thinking, this is my personal assessment. What I'm seeing is not going to help me do that. So I'm choosing a different option. Now, someone else could agree with the principle, and think, well, given this circumstance, given the nature of schools, given the nature of this school and this place, and the influence I can have there, it's different and permissible here, and even wise and strategic. That's possible.
Amen.
It's possible. So don't hear me share my conviction as denouncing someone who might triangulate things a little differently. I don't know if that helps at all, but that's where I'm at, and I'm happy to engage different perspectives or follow-up questions or comments. And I don't know if this is like a tense issue or not. No, it's not. Okay, someone said no. All right, good. Any questions about how I just talked through that? Yes, ma'am.
I think it's helpful in thinking of these two matters. You know, you're sharing that you have come to it that way. And I think it's helpful to make the assumption if believers differ. And like you said, you have fellow believers that you respect that have come to different conclusions. But it's helpful to recognize that as believers and as people that all have the Spirit within us, that if we do reach different conclusions, that if you hold a certain position, to look at the other person that holds that different position in a way to say they have also searched the scriptures and have come to this decision scripturally and not just as a second best option for their family. Like trying, I don't know if I'm communicating well what I'm saying, but I think there can be this, I have this conviction, that person must not have thought through everything, and because they're not on that same page, they're not thinking the same thing that I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to be thinking unbiblically about this, instead of they've reached this conclusion because of biblical principles.
Mm-hmm.
Am I making sense?
Can everyone in the back hear Kate?
So I think there can be a tendency in really any of these issues to look and say, hey, that person didn't reach my conclusion, so they must not have thought as biblically as I have about this, as opposed to this is where my preferences and my conscience has
Mhm.
led me, and how I think I can best glorify God in this situation. And that goes for both sides, you know, of whatever issue we're talking about.
All right. Yes, sir, in the back.
And I think how we communicate it, you know, what Kate is saying, how we communicate that is so incredibly important. Like what we are saying, how we are sharing our, you know, where our conscience is leading us is incredibly important to act then with humility even in that. And I think that's where we get into a lot of
Yeah.
hurt feelings and pain and things like that because of how we're then communicating, well, must not have thought that one through, you know, that kind of thing. So.
Yes, I've got like 8 thoughts. I'm trying to pick which one to share. Why don't you talk while I'm picking?
It just brings
Yeah.
to my mind the verse, and I can memorize words better than references, so somebody probably knows where this is, but it says, let every man, and this is KJV, let every man be fully persuaded.
Yeah, it's in Romans 14. We're about to look at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think there are so many scriptures that work into this, you know, Romans 8:28, all things work together for good. And different people are in different stages in their life and have different, we don't all have the same level of knowledge or experience or anything like that.
Mhm.
So we're going to make our decisions, and as you have so carefully taught us, we're coming with our consciences, but we're not all necessarily on the exact same plane.
Right.
Because we don't all have the same conscience, because we haven't all had the same experiences.
Yeah.
And that is where grace and mercy come in. And instead of looking at somebody and being critical that they're doing something different, like you've all said, you can strike up conversation
Mhm.
you do it, and it doesn't have to be a hill.
And to Kate's point, it's not necessarily, like, I think what Mom is saying is great, but also to Kate's point, it's not, they haven't reached my level yet.
Right, exactly.
It's, we have some different views on some things, and that's okay, and they can be just as godly as I am.
Okay, I'm agreeing with what you're saying, but I also want to qualify something. It all depends on the issue we're discussing. What if the issue were LGBT? It's just different convictions. Don't take it so strongly. Don't assume that yours is just the right one and they haven't thought it through. It's just, I think if we have that attitude for an issue like that, we're actually not loving the person and we're not honoring the Lord.
That's so clearly laid out.
So she said that's so clearly laid out. The thing is, everyone thinks it's clearly laid out when we're talking about a strong conviction for an issue. And that's where we need wisdom to know, how do we slot this issue? I'm just going to move on to the next section because I want to show you a chart, because this is all related here. Let me give one. I keep going, yes, no, no, no. Okay, I'll do this one. Politics. Voting Democrat or Republican for governor, Congress, president at that level. 10 years ago, I would have said Christianity doesn't demand going one way or another, or not going one way or another. I even wrote a book with my friend Jonathan Lehman several years ago before COVID, and if I were to write today, it would sound different. Because it almost came across like political parties are morally equivalent. And today, given how the Democratic platform is so pro-abortion, I'm now more comfortable saying to a Christian, I don't think it would honor the Lord for you to vote for a Democrat at that level. I'm not saying you have to vote Republican. I'm not saying you have to vote, but I don't see how you can honor the Lord by supporting that platform, given what it's supporting so strongly. And I wouldn't have said it like that 5 years ago, 10 years ago. What changed? I think what's changed is the Democratic Party and our political climate and our cultural, it's been, the Overton window's been shifting left. And I'm trying to be a faithful reader of the culture and the change and faithfully apply how we should live. The Christians in Germany had to figure this out up to when Hitler took over. What do we do with the Nazi Party? Can you be a Christian and part of the Nazi Party? And it was ambiguous, and finally they came out with the Barmen Declaration, basically saying Christians shouldn't do that. I feel like we're approaching that with Christians shouldn't be part of that. Now, that's a parallel issue, I think, with public schools possibly, is are we approaching an issue where to partner with certain schools might be I don't know if that's even possible anymore. Now, just me making that comparison might be really offensive to someone. I'm not trying to be offensive. What I'm trying to show is we have to ask questions like that is, when does something move from being a conscience issue parallel to Romans 14 to being an obedience issue that there shouldn't be disagreement on? I don't think we're there dogmatically yet with public schools across the board. It's possible to have pockets where the schools are not like the strong downgrade trend that's happening nationally. It's possible to have a charter school that's basically like a private Christian school almost, and it's technically public school. Like there are all kinds of footnotes to that. I don't know if I'm helping or making this worse, but what I'm going to do now is transition from how do I calibrate my own conscience to the more challenging question is, how do I relate to a fellow Christian when our consciences disagree? And I think you wanted me to go till 11:30, so what I'll do is I'll introduce this concept of triage. 11:40 would be okay?
Because what happens next is Brian comes and prays for the food, and we move the chairs, set up the tables, and start eating lunch.
Okay.
So if you need a few extra minutes, it's not the end of the world.
Okay. Do any of you work in the medical profession, like a medical doctor? You do?
Well, I did.
What'd you do?
I was a surgical technician.
Okay. So you didn't work in the ER?
I worked in labor and delivery.
Labor and delivery. That might work here. When people came in and thought they wanted to be admitted, you had to assess, is she dilated to like 8, or it's her first one, she doesn't know. You need to go home. Like, you're kind of figuring out who needs my attention first, what's most urgent. Triage, yeah. We all do this in life with different areas. So it happens in the medical field. When you're parenting multiple kids and they're all clamoring for your attention, you have to figure out who really needs it first. We triage in life. And Al Mohler wrote an article way back called Theological Triage. If you just Google Mohler, Mohler triage, you'll find it. It's a good article. And he basically says this. This is some of my attempt to formulate it systematically. There are 3 levels of importance. So this first level, you must affirm this to be a Christian. You can't deny this and still be a Christian in any meaningful sense. So it's first level. It's essential for the Christian faith. It's dogma. It's fundamental teachings. It's essential, most central to Christianity. It's the fundamentals of Christianity. All Christians agree on this. Like Jesus is God. God is triune. Jesus is coming back. Salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. This is boilerplate. Every Christian all across all time agrees with this. You can't deny this and be a Christian. And you got level 2, which, second level, it's crucial for church health, but not essential for the Christian faith. It's doctrine, denominational distinctives, crucial for church health, and it creates boundaries between Christians, like different churches and denominations. Your name is Redeemer Bible Church. I think that means you're Baptist in your convictions. You're not Paedo-Baptist. You don't baptize babies, right? I think that's correct. And I have friends who are baby baptizers, and like Kevin DeYoung, he's a friend, and I don't think he's going to hell for that. I think he's wrong, but I understand his view, and it's very reasonable when you understand it in that theological framework, the Reformed theological framework, but I don't think it's correct. So I'm not going to plant a church with him, but I love him as a brother. And then you got third level issues. It's important, but not essential for the Christian faith or church health. These are disputable matters, matters of conscience. Members of the same church should be able to disagree on these issues and still have close fellowship with each other. So this is what we were just talking about. And the question you have to ask is, when you present an issue, does it go in slot 1, 2, or 3? And that's where the big rub comes. Because you might think it goes in 1, and someone else says, no, that's in 3. Take a particular view of social justice. There are some more progressive Christians who would put that in number 1, whereas I might put it in number 3. Or take sexual ethics regarding homosexuality. Some would say, that's not in the Nicene Creed. It's not in any of the ancient creeds. I affirm the ancient creeds. And I also affirm LGBT Christians. And I would reply, no, that's a level 1 issue. That's part of just basic obedience. God couldn't have been clearer on that one. So there's disagreement there. Might take the issue of Calvinism. Do you have to be a Calvinist? That means you believe in God's meticulous sovereignty and everything, including the salvation of certain people. Do you have to be a Calvinist to be a Christian? Of course not. Calvinism is true, but you don't have to be a Christian to hold to it. I don't know what I'm starting here, but I'm just throwing it out there. I'm part of Bethlehem Baptist Church. John Piper used that word all the time, so it's no problem in our church context. Some people would put that in number 3. We put it in number 2 in our church context. You can join our church and not be a Calvinist, no problem. But our leaders are Calvinists. The elders are all believe that. So I'm just trying to help you sort these things. So then when we talk about your view on schooling choices, for example, in the past, I always put that in number 3. I mean, I went to a public school. That's how I viewed it. And I'm in process here. I'm starting to ask, are the changes so pronounced given our cultural decline, especially in sexual ethics, such that putting your children under that kind of constant teaching could harm them, and it's just a poor choice? That's the question I'm asking. I'm not dogmatically asserting it. That's where I'm trying to figure out, is it more like here? That's I'm wrestling with my personal conviction of how to communicate this. I've never actually done this publicly before. It's talking to my wife a lot. And this is why I'm grateful that we live in church communities where we can talk about it with each other.
Right.
And we should be able to talk about these things with each other with the right spirit,
That's right.
without tearing each other's throats out and leaving the church in a huff over it. Like, this is, of all places, we should be able to talk about hard things and love each other as we do so.
Amen.
And that's why I don't mind you asking any questions on the table. So, what do you think about this whole model, these 3 levels of importance? I don't have this in the book. This is some more recent thoughts. So here's some benefits of this way of thinking. One, it helps us not treat every theological issue as essential to the gospel. It helps us keep things in perspective. So everything is connected to the gospel in some way, but the way I think of it is if you got like a ball of yarn, if I pull this thread, how much does that make the ball come untangled? And if it like completely untangles it, that's just critical to keeping it there. And like Christ's deity, central, need that. And then there are other issues where it's important. None of these things are unimportant. They're all important. But some are more important. So here's how I would justify that from Scripture. 1 Corinthians 5, Paul says, I have preached you the gospel, which is of first importance. He says first importance, which means that some things are of second importance. Jesus referred to the weightier matters of the law, which means some important matters are more weighty. So that's at least a justification for 2 levels of importance. So this 3 levels is just another way to be more precise. So that's number 1, it helps us keep things in perspective. Number 2, it helps us recognize that other Christians who disagree with us on issues that are not essential to Christianity are fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. Even on a number 2 issue. There are many brothers and sisters that I know who are godly believers, and we just differ. I don't think of them as not Christians. Or let's not go there. Third, it helps to discern whom we may faithfully partner with in Christian ministry to various degrees. When you have limited funds, and we all do, you think, should we be supporting this missionary or that missionary? Well, it makes sense to be reproducing what you think is most right. So you'd want to give your money to someone who is more in line with your church's doctrine than someone who is less aligned. That's just common sense. So by not giving money to Presbyterian church plants, doesn't mean we think they're not Christians. It's just we're prioritizing what we think is more accurate. But there are some dangers to this model. One, we may misuse the model to trivialize anything that's not essential to Christianity. It's not a level 1 issue, so it doesn't matter. We shouldn't talk about it. Let's not just forget about it. Don't worry about it. And if God has revealed truth about it, it matters. We should want to know the right view. So even in Romans 14, the people who hold the wrong view on alcohol and on food and on holy days, Paul calls them weak. That implies it's not ideal. They're theologically incorrect. But on those issues, it's not a make or break thing for Christianity. But it doesn't mean that the issues don't matter. It's just Paul saying something else matters more. And that's loving each other in your differences. So for 3rd level issues, they matter, but we shouldn't trivialize them. Number 2, we may misuse the model to rationalize disobeying God. Here's where I see this most often. The role of men and women in God's design. I believe that God designed men to lead the church as pastors, and God designed men to lead their homes, to lead their wife and their children, to lead the families. And I believe that's explicit in Scripture. It's built into how God designed human beings. It's part of His plan. Now, you can join my church and reject that. You can be a member, not a pastor, but you can hold what's called the egalitarian view or evangelical feminist view, which means you think it's okay to have a woman pastor or it's okay for a woman not to submit to her husband. Now, I think that's wrong, but I have a category for someone believing that and still being a Christian. But what this model does, what I've seen people do with it, is say, on that issue, it doesn't really matter. It's not a 1st level issue. And I'd say, Oh no, it matters. This is about obeying or disobeying God. You're not going to stand before the Lord and say, oh God, First Timothy 2, or Paul says, I don't permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. That's a second level issue. Didn't you know that? So it doesn't matter. No, that's an obedience issue. And third, we may misuse the model to weigh all level 2 issues equally. So let me show you the level 2 thing again. The metaphor I'm going with here is church health. So you might hear me sniffing a lot. Whenever I talk, my nose runs. It's one of my thorns in the flesh. I think I'm okay. That's health-wise, very trivial. It's different than having Ebola. All right? If I had Ebola, you wouldn't want me in this room. That is dangerous. It spreads fast, and it kills. But me being here with this thing, no problem, right? Now, some level 2 issues are like that cold, the common cold. Like, this is my opinion. I haven't talked to your pastors about this. They may disagree. There are different views on continuationism and cessationism. So talking about the spiritual gifts like speaking in tongues, prophecy, healing. John MacArthur, Tom Schreiner are examples of people who argue for cessationism. Those particular gifts have ceased. We shouldn't be speaking in tongues when the church meets, etc. And then there are those who are continuationists, like Wayne Grudem or D.A. Carson, who would argue in a nuanced way, no, they have not ceased. They continue. They may continue if God sovereignly gives those gifts in a church context. Now, I think there's a right view on that. I'm not going to get into that now. But if you're in a healthy church, differing on that issue is more like a cold than Ebola. I don't think it's going to be like a make or break, kill the church issue. It shouldn't be, in my view. But if you're wrong on women pastors, I think that's like Ebola, because the hermeneutic, the interpretational method you get to arrive at that conclusion is a guaranteed almost slippery slope to affirming the whole LGBT and all the rest. It's the same hermeneutical, it's the same principles of interpreting that reach that conclusion. So back to here, I don't want to suggest from this model that all level 2 issues are the same. Some are more serious than others, in my view. Now, all that is to set up Romans 14 and talking through that. I'm guessing we'll do that tomorrow morning more prior to the sermon, and then planning to preach through that. I'll just give you a teaser of where we're going to go, and that's to just show you the strong conscience versus the weak conscience on all these issues that Paul addresses. And then what I'm going to give you is 14 principles from Romans 14 on how we should relate to each other when we disagree on third level issues, on disputable matters, on matters of conscience. And I'm guessing that in our lunchtime, if we talk more, some of your questions are going to be about this stuff, and that's fine. And even more so, it's how do I know whether an issue belongs in 1, 2, or 3? That, I think, is the heart of many of our disagreements, especially like the school choice issue. Is someone might think, no, it's here, and someone else goes, no, it's here. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt LaCava. Or Brian, Pastor Brian.